I manage a hotel reception desk in Vienna. And last month, this American couple checked in demanding we email them copies of every guest's passport for their travel blog about authentic stays. When I explained that's illegal under GDPR, the woman pulled out her phone and read from some article about European hospitality standards that she'd clearly misunderstood. Her husband nodded along, adding that back in Florida, hotels always share guest information for networking purposes. I just stood there while they waited for me to crack open our database like it was a public library. Eventually, I had to get my manager, who explained that violating GDPR could cost us 4% of annual revenue. The husband actually said, "But we're journalists," as if that was a magic spell. They weren't journalists. My cousin works at a pharmacy in Amsterdam, and an American tourist once insisted the pharmacist print out the prescription records of that nice couple from Iowa he'd met at breakfast because he wanted to compare medication costs for his blog. When told that's criminally illegal, he suggested they just text him photos of the records instead. Since technically that's not printing, my cousin had to explain that the method of transfer doesn't change the felony. The man left a 1-star review saying Dutch pharmacies were paranoid about sharing basic medical networking information. At a bank in Stockholm, an American asked to tell her to look up her new Swedish friend's account balance so she could plan an appropriate birthday gift. She had the friend's full name and email address written on hotel stationery, like that constituted authorization. When the teller declined, the woman said in America, "Banks help customers with social coordination all the time," which is definitely not a thing banks do anywhere. These stories all share the same DNA. Americans arriving in Europe, encountering privacy laws that actually have teeth, and deciding the entire continent is being difficult on purpose. Let me walk you through exactly how this plays out across 15 separate situations. I work the front desk at a medical clinic in Hamburg, and last year an American patient demanded we email him the X-ray files of another patient he'd made friends with in the waiting room, because they wanted to compare sports injuries. When I said that violates every medical privacy law in Germany, he insisted that in Texas, clinics routinely share patient information between friends who sign verbal agreements. He actually said we shook hands on it. I told him a handshake doesn't override federal privacy law. And he responded that German healthcare was weirdly secretive compared to American medical transparency. The man had met this other patient 15 minutes earlier. They'd discussed knee problems. That was the extent of their relationship, and he genuinely believed it entitled him to someone else's confidential medical imaging. My brother manages a car rental agency in Brussels, and an American customer once handed him a list of 7 names, demanding we pull the rental histories of each because they were coordinating a group trip, and he needed to verify everyone's driving records. When my brother explained that's spectacularly illegal under GDPR, the customer said that Enterprise in Ohio does this all the time for corporate retreats. I'm reasonably confident Enterprise does not. In fact, distribute customer driving records to random trip organizers. The man then suggested we could just email him their license numbers and insurance details as a compromise, apparently believing that partial privacy violations are somehow acceptable. He left insisting Belgian car rentals were uncooperative with basic group planning logistics. At a university in Copenhagen, I work in student services. An American exchange student's mother called demanding her daughter's complete academic transcript, attendance records, and campus health center visits because she was helping with career planning from home. When I explained that students over 18 control their own educational records under European law, she said that in Michigan, parents can access everything until age 24 because they're paying tuition. She'd somehow confused the university's billing privileges with a legal right to access protected student data. When I held firm, she asked to speak to whoever makes exceptions for American families, genuinely believing we had a special office for overriding privacy laws based on tuition payment geography. Her daughter was 19. The mother had no legal standing whatsoever, but she'd convinced herself that American parental payment structures invalidate European privacy protections. I work at a law firm in Dublin, and an American client once asked his attorney to pull the criminal record of his Irish neighbor just to be safe before carpooling. When the attorney explained that's both illegal and absurd, the client insisted that in Arizona, attorneys routinely access public records for clients' peace of mind. He then clarified he wanted the full record, not just convictions, including arrests that didn't lead to charges. Because you can never be too careful. My colleague had to explain that European privacy law protects arrest records specifically to prevent exactly this kind of speculative character investigation. The American responded that Irish law was protecting potential criminals from reasonable vetting, as if casual neighbor. Background checks were a fundamental right being suppressed by overreaching privacy. Regulations. My sister manages a cafe in Lyon, and last summer, an American customer asked her to look up the coffee preferences and dietary restrictions of a French woman he'd chatted with once, because he wanted to invite her to lunch and plan the perfect menu. When my sister explained, "We don't keep customer preference files for romantic planning purposes," he said that Starbucks in California maintains detailed customer profiles that baristas can access for personalized service. Even if that were true, which it isn't, it wouldn't justify sharing one customer's information with another customer for dating purposes. The man had spoken to this woman for maybe 5 minutes about favorite pastries. He genuinely believed this brief interaction entitled him to her stored personal data so he could orchestrate an elaborate lunch surprise. I work at a grocery store in Oslo, and an American tourist once demanded to know the purchasing history of the Tausbro person in front of her in line because she's buying all the good chocolate and I want to know what brand she usually gets. When I said that's not information we can disclose, she insisted that Whole Foods in Seattle lets shoppers share purchase recommendations through their membership system. I'm quite certain Whole Foods does not provide real-time purchase histories of random customers to other random customers standing in line. This woman watched someone buy chocolate, decided that entitled her to their complete shopping data, and then got annoyed when Norwegian privacy law prevented her from accessing it. She left muttering about how European grocery stores don't facilitate customer community building. My uncle owns a restaurant in Barcelona, and an American diner once asked the waiter to check the reservation book and tell him what time away. Spanish businessman usually eats dinner because he wanted to accidentally bump into him to discuss a potential deal. When the waiter declined, the American said that in New York, restaurants help regular customers network strategically by sharing reservation patterns. He suggested the waiter could just text him when this businessman arrived, since that would be more discreet than checking the book. My uncle had two personally. Explained that sharing any customer's dining schedule with another customer violates both privacy law and basic professional ethics. The American left a review complaining that Barcelona restaurants don't support entrepreneurial networking culture. At a bakery in Zurich, I work the morning shift, and an American customer once photographed the credit card signature of the woman in front of her, then asked me to confirm the signature matched our records for identity verification purposes. When I told her to delete the photo immediately and explained that she'd just committed a potential crime, she said she was helping prevent fraud in Dallas. Stores encourage customers to watch out for each other by verifying signatures. She'd appointed herself an unauthorized security volunteer and genuinely believed Swiss bakeries should applaud her illegal photography of another customer's financial information. I had to threaten to call the police before she deleted the image, and she spent the entire time insisting Swiss bakeries were hostile to community safety initiatives. I sell train tickets at Brussels Central Station, and an American tourist once demanded the travel history of another American she'd met at the hotel because she wanted to coordinate sightseeing efficiently. I explained that's confidential customer information protected by law. She insisted that Amtrak shares passenger itineraries between travelers all the time for group trip planning. She had this woman's name and email address, which she believed constituted sufficient authorization for me to pull up complete booking records from our database. I told her that if she wants to coordinate travel, she should ask the person directly rather than expecting a railway company to violate privacy law. She responded that Belgian rail services were making travel coordination unnecessarily difficult compared to American train transparency. The two women had met once, 12 hours earlier. My cousin works at a bus company in Edinburgh. An American passenger once asked him to identify which bus a specific Scottish man usually takes to work so I can plan my commute to chat with him about rugby. When my cousin declined, the American said that in Boston, transit workers help regular passengers build communities by sharing schedule information. He wanted us to surveil another customer's travel patterns so he could manufacture random encounters based on stolen routine data. My cousin explained that's both creepy and illegal. And the American left, insisting Scottish bus companies don't facilitate organic social networking. I work at a bike rental shop in Munich, and an American customer once demanded the rental history and typical routes of a German cyclist he'd noticed around town because he wanted to join her rides and maybe ask her out. When I refused, he said that bike shops in Portland maintain rider profiles that they share to build cycling communities. He'd been casually stalking a woman's cycling patterns, wanted us to provide detailed data to facilitate further stalking, and framed it as community building. I had to explain that what he was describing was harassment enabled by privacy violations, and German law protects people from exactly this behavior. He left a review saying Munich bike rentals prevent cyclists from connecting naturally. At a metro station in Paris, I worked the information booth, and an American tourist once photographed another passenger's Navigo pass, then asked me to look up that person's travel zones and home station so she could understand typical Parisian commute patterns for her travel blog. When I told her that's illegal surveillance, she insisted that in Washington, D.C., metro workers help journalists gather authentic transit data by sharing anonymized passenger information. Nothing about photographing someone's transit pass and requesting their home address is anonymized. She'd committed a privacy violation, then expected me to compound it by providing additional protected information. I threatened to report her to station security, and she spent 10 minutes arguing that Parisian transit was hostile to authentic travel journalism. I work at a co-working space in Berlin, and last week, an American member asked me to pull the Wi-Fi usage logs of another member to see what sites he's visiting for competitive business research. I said that's illegal network surveillance. He insisted that we work in San Francisco shares internet analytics between members for collaborative innovation. He wanted me to hand him another person's complete browsing history, framed as professional development. I explained that German privacy law exists specifically to prevent this exact abuse, and he responded that European co-working spaces don't understand modern business transparency culture. The pattern never changes. Americans encounter privacy protections that actually limit access to other people's data, and rather than accepting those limits, they invent fictional American practices where privacy violations are normal and helpful. They're not struggling with translation or cultural adjustment. They're rejecting the fundamental concept that other people's information isn't public property. Next time you're in Europe and someone asks you to violate GDPR for their convenience, just remember, they're probably writing a blog post about how uncooperative you're being.